Hello, and welcome to The Realities of Race. I'm Angela Pace, Director of Community Affairs for WBNS 10 TV, and we are here at COSI, the Center of Science and Industry, site of a special traveling exhibit called Race, Are We So Different? As we celebrate the city of Columbus's 200th birthday, we celebrate her people, the diverse and different populations that helped to make Columbus a smart and open city of the 21st century. We are a city of similarities and of differences. Among those differences, race. Now, race can at times be a tricky subject to discuss, even in 2012. And yet that's what lots of people, young and old, have been doing right here at COSI. And as we found out, race is not always so easy to define.
Race?
Oh, that's a tough question.
Different nationalities, different colors.
Race is just your background, I guess.
Julie, I think race is what makes you who you are.
You might think that it's about where your ancestors are from.
Everybody is an individual person, and they all are a different color.
Whenever I talk about race, I don't look at it as something that's bad, but something that's unique, something that's extraordinary. I just think it's awesome.
This exhibit is designed to get people talking, and we hope that our program tonight will help to prompt some of those conversations. That's exactly what Azuka Mumen, Senior Director of Community Outreach and Engagement here at COSI, is counting on.
We wanted to bring this exhibit to Columbus because it's a diverse city, it's a smart and open city, and this fits in with the community connection that we want to have between COSI and the community at large.
This exhibit, I know, has specific areas that it wants to look at. Tell us about those areas.
Yes, the exhibit is based on looking at race through three lenses. We're looking at it through the science, the biology. Of course, that's the strong connection in COSI. We're looking at the history of race, that race is about migration of people. And we're looking at the lived experience of race. Again, the experience for the individual in each of the racial groups with living with race in America.
Are you afraid at all, worried at all about how this exhibit is going to be perceived?
Not at all, Angela. The community has really embraced the exhibit and embraced the topic, and I think a lot of people agree it's time to have that conversation. This is the kind of thing that COSI is known for, starting that conversation, having that dialogue, and bringing information, education to the community. So this is still very much a COSI exhibit.
In a perfect world, what stays here in Columbus?
The opportunity to have a dialogue and to exchange ideals and information with each other, and to accept that race is not a taboo subject.
And so we begin by looking at the first of the three lenses through which we will examine race, the science of race. For hundreds of years, we have used visual differences to classify people into races: skin color, hair form, eye shape. And for hundreds of years, those classifications have been backed up, allegedly, by science. But scientists today say there is no science of race, that genetically, we really aren't that different. It was Ohio State's own Jesse Owens who shattered myths about race when he won 4 gold medals in the 1936 Berlin Olympics, destroying Hitler's theory of the superiority of the Aryan race, a theory based on what today is labeled bad science.
Race is not a scientific concept of biology. It doesn't exist in that way. Initially, we tried to classify it and thought of it in the same way that we classified animals and came up with categories of race. But as scientists looked deeper and deeper, we began to see that those differences didn't exist. Early blood typing and blood plasma research showed that there were no differences, but the ideas persisted.
Today, the science of race shows that all human life began in Africa, and that over tens of thousands of years, variations evolved as humans began to adapt physically and physiologically to survive in their new environments as they moved around the globe.
If you move into a northern clime where your diet is more wheat-based, for example, wheat is not as high in vitamin D. Your skin tone will, apparently, as we've seen, become lighter so that you can absorb more vitamin D from the sun. As you walk into the exhibit, you can present your hand and take a color sample of your skin. And you'll see that plotted against the color sample of everyone else who's done this recently in the exhibit. And the real challenge is to find the dividing line, to say whose complexion is black and whose is not black.
Now, does that really look any different from mine? No, not really.
The bad science looked for differences between races, differences that became the basis of stereotypes, oppression, and discrimination. This exhibit, as you can see, is multi-dimensional and features hands-on components, artifacts, videos. We got a chance to take a mini tour to see just what the exhibit has to offer. Steve Witt, you are the manager of experience programs. That's a great title. Basically, what do you do here for the race exhibit?
Well, my job in any exhibit that we have is to help our team of teachers to think about what we can teach, how we can help our guests experience all of the different things we do at COSI.
So there's an educational component to the race exhibit as well.
Absolutely.
All right,
yes.
Show us, this is one of my favorites.
Yeah.
What is this, and tell us how this works.
This is a wonderful story, and this is an example of how science is always changing and is always learning more. When you and I were kids, Angela, nobody knew where human beings had come from, how long we've been on this planet. It was a mystery. But today we have a much better idea, and the story actually starts in Africa 200,000 years ago. Human beings were a very small group that lived in Central Africa there. And it's an amazing story, a story that we didn't really understand until very recently, that all human beings are a subset of those first original humans that lived in Africa.
And what a great way to educate people
Absolutely.
about it, to show them with the dots like that. Steve, one of the components of this exhibit is the science of race. So tell us, in that vein,
Sure.
What is this tool?
Yeah, well, this is a tool that was used back in the 1930s, and it's just one of many tools that was used to measure human attributes. And I think the biggest message that this exhibit gives is that you can never separate science from the culture in which it's done. A lot of scientists thought that you could measure cranium size, you could measure the length of thigh bones, you could measure the length of fingers, all sorts of things that they thought would be genetic markers for race. So again, it's interesting to see that the way science works is that sure, science can come up with some pretty crazy ideas based on the culture that it's embedded in, but there are always other scientists who are going to check those ideas.
All right, now Steve, I know that a lot of children are going to be coming
Right.
to this exhibit.
Absolutely.
This exhibit, and I see you've got a child-friendly area here.
We do.
Tell us about this area and how you're going to use this to educate folks
Sure.
about the race exhibit.
Yeah, well, we have found that topics like race and lots of other topics in science can be intimidating and challenging. And the best way, we believe, to approach that is through yourself. A big part of this whole exhibit is two big ideas. One is that human beings are so much like each other, and two, every single one of us is different. Somebody once told me there are, how many races of humans are there on the earth? Well, how many people are there? Because every human being is different from every other human being. And that's a big thing we want to talk about, that everybody's unique, everybody's individual. What makes you special?
And our thanks to Steve Witt for giving us a peek at some of the exhibits here. Coming up next, we're going to learn about the history of race, both on the national stage and here at home. But before we take a break, COSI wanted to ask some teenagers what they think about race. So about 30 high school students gathered here in January to explore the subject of race and to create school lockers as illustrations of their thoughts on the subject. Take a look at what took place that day.
We wanted to show her like everyone looks different, but they're all exactly the same.
Our theme is We Are the One, just demonstrating like our differences and also our similarities, which are more than our differences.
Not many people are different just because of their race. And people can be the same and people can be different, but I mean, you shouldn't hold a grudge or be racist because of that.
Welcome back to the Realities of Race. I'm Angela Pace, coming to you from COSI, site of an exhibit called Race, Are We So Different? We have taken a look at the so-called science of race, and we've learned that there is no scientific justification for race. But how has that been played out in history? Well, historians say that in the 1300s and 1400s, there was no concept of race. It just did not exist. But things began changing in the 1600s when race became an economic and cultural creation. The idea of race has its genesis in the Atlantic slave trade, differentiating people based on skin color, a concept manufactured to justify the enslavement of Africans in the New World.
When we think about slavery, Africans weren't enslaved because they were Africans. They weren't enslaved because they were dark-skinned. They weren't enslaved because they were of quote-unquote a different race or some other. They were enslaved because they could be enslaved in the sense that their labor could be exploited.
Over time, the concept of race hardened, legally tying slavery to people of African descent.
So we begin to see over the course of just a few decades in the 1600s, race becoming real, race becoming concrete, race becoming a part of the colonial law, so that the difference and the tools used to maintain the exploitation of people of color, African descent, become stronger.
The notion of race and hierarchy wasn't limited to people of African descent. It began to apply to just about any non-Europeans who came to these shores.
In the early 1900s, Chinese laborers being brought over into the West to help build the West and build the railroads. And so you have the Chinese Exclusion Act, for example, saying, okay, we need these Chinese laborers, but let's not get carried away. We don't need too many. We need just enough to do the work that we want them to do. Many people of Latin American descent, when they come over here, they too have to decide for themselves where do they fit in this hierarchy that is very real.
Even in this 21st century, after so many revolutions and evolutions in this great American melting pot, we are still trained to first see a person's race.
Certainly human beings are always looking for demarcations of difference, but there is nothing that says that race has to be permanent because it's something that existed in a particular social and cultural moment.
We now know how the concept of race developed historically here in the United States, but how has race fit into Columbus's 200-year history? We spoke with Jeff Lefevre, director of the Columbus Historical Society, to get some insight.
We have a long history of both good and bad issues with race. One of our first stories is about Sarah Sullivan, who was Lucas Sullivan's wife, first gentleman to come here, given land to really form a settlement here. His wife adopted a biracial baby and breastfed the baby. It was a child that there's not quite the full story known, but a child of a servant of hers. She was from Kentucky. So probably when she got to Columbus and Ohio, where it was free, this was a servant, and we think it was a military gentleman who was Caucasian. They abandoned the baby, and Sarah Sullivan had just had a baby of her own, so she actually breastfed Arthur Boak, was the child's name, and raised him as her own. So we've been welcoming for people for a long time and welcoming to different groups. But there has been issues. There was times when people tended to segregate themselves. We had areas that were German, Italian, and we had areas that were African American, but then we had areas like Flytown. Flytown was an integrated neighborhood. We did have segregation here in Columbus. It's something a lot of people don't realize.
So Jeff, with regard to your own home and where you live on the near east side of Columbus, you've got this legal document here that's pretty interesting.
Yeah, and they actually signed this in 1925, but they started, I'll go down a little further, that the occupancy by a colored family of a single residence on said street would destroy immediately a large percentage of the value of said property. By the term colored person, as used in this contract, it is meant any person in whole or a part of the Negro race or blood, and any person other than a member of the white or Caucasian race. Now, it would have gone to about 1974 if the Supreme Court hadn't struck down the segregation in housing sales based on skin color.
So where were African Americans living in Columbus during that period?
A lot of them were living around what we now know as the King Lincoln District. If they didn't live in that district and lived maybe in Flytown or other areas, that was the area where they would shop. But a lot of times we forget it was a vibrant area because that was the only place they could go at that time.
What about the influx of other races Asians, for a matter of fact?
We've had Asians in Columbus at least as far back as the early 1900s. We had a Chinese businessmen's community that used to be downtown, down in the area where the courthouses are now. And people were running various businesses, more service industry businesses, restaurants, Far East Restaurant, which is now known as Wings, out on the east side on Main Street. That started in the 1920s. So we've had other races here in the city for a long time.
Historically, where do you think Columbus fits when it comes to race? Has it had a positive racial history, negative racial history?
I think it mirrors a lot of what's going on in the country, but I think we've done a much better job going back, like I said, to our founders, you know, who accepted diversity in our city. We've always been an open and welcoming city. We have people coming from around the world for Battelle Institute, for the Ohio State University for generations now. So we've been a very welcoming city. We've had our issues, yes. We've had segregation. We've had small racial issues come up, but we've really been pretty welcoming.
What memories do you have about race in Columbus? Go to COSI's Facebook wall and join in the discussion. We've given you a historical snapshot about race in Columbus, but that's the past. What about the present and the future? When Realities of Race continues, we'll share the lived experiences of some of the younger members of our community. By now, you've probably noticed some of these amazing photographic pieces throughout the exhibit. The artist responsible for these images is Wing Young Huey, and we'll speak with him about how his work complements the visitor's experience at Race Are We So Different? In the meantime, let's hear what people are saying after visiting this groundbreaking exhibit.
I think it's awesome to show all the differences, especially for the young children who come in to say, oh, they're different, but at the same time, they're similar.
If you come out and look and see what people have endured, what can be, what was.
My daughter's actually in the first grade, and I think at this age it's a really, really informative exhibit to have them expand what they know about race.
We've already mentioned that this exhibit was created to start a conversation about race, to get people talking, and that's exactly what some Central Ohio teenagers are doing. In addition to presenting the lockers that are a part of the gallery, COSI hosted a teen forum, a platform for a candid discussion about race. COSI's Teen Advisory Council led the conversation. More than 60 students from area high schools visited the exhibit and then participated in a panel discussion. Everything from racial stereotypes to self-segregation was discussed as teenagers from diverse backgrounds talked about the realities of race.
It's important for us because for our generation, we want something that's good for us, not something that's bad for us to ruin us.
It just makes you think and helps you form your own opinions and like basically just not go off what other people tell you.
It is great to hear the youth of our community talk so openly about race. If you're a teenager, head over to COSI's Facebook page and give us your thoughts. How relevant is the color of one's skin or the texture of one's hair among your friends and at your school? In most instances, when the subject of race comes up, the discussion is black or white. But Columbus is home to new Americans. These are first-generationers whose parents or they themselves were born overseas. Central Ohioans who have spent a good part of their young lives adjusting to being different.
I am Puerto Rican. Both my parents are from Ponce, Puerto Rico, and I was born in Brooklyn, New York.
Christina Vera says it wasn't until she moved to Columbus at the age of 7 that she realized that she was different from the other children, something her mother tried to help her with.
She kind of kept prepping me, like, you know, kids are going to be different, you know, they're going to ask questions. And, you know, so she kind of, you know, I know she was doing the right thing by trying to, like, prepare me, but it definitely made me a little bit more nervous. You know, even some of my classmates, I felt like they kept wanting to figure out what box I fit into, and there was no real box that I fit into.
Sadi Choa also found it hard to fit in.
I'm Chinese by ethnic, but I was born in Cambodia, so you can call myself Chinese Cambodian American.
As a young boy, he was struck by how different he was when he first walked into Westgate Elementary School, not speaking one word of English.
Everyone else looks different than me, and I find it very fascinating when I stepped into that school. But there were 2 students that took time out to teach me during breaks. They did not go out and play with the other kids. They stayed with me and teach me each of those words.
Sadi prefers to focus on the positive side of his experiences with race, but he admits that he has often been the victim of stereotyping.
Names like that they call me, and they assumed that I was good in math and science, and that I speak with a funny accent, so therefore I am not American.
Both Sadi and Christina believe that Columbus lives up to its brand as a smart and open city, and that they and other new Americans here will come to be known for something other than their race.
I would love us to reach a point to where it's not awkward to talk about race.
It is time, for us to come together and have that dialogue.
This will be the city and the stomping ground and the foundation piece for other states and other cities to be able to see, wow, Columbus gets it, and they get it because they want to get it.
As we've learned, there is no scientific basis for race, and yet it's a part of our everyday lives. It's intertwined in our culture. Minneapolis-based photographer Wing Young Huey struggled with race and his identity as an Asian American growing up in Minnesota. He set out to understand more about himself and, in turn, discovered an ever-changing American landscape. Those images have become an integral part of this exhibit.
Growing up in Duluth and as a native Minnesotan, I would get asked growing up, where are you from? I would say, I'm from Duluth. I'm from here. And people would say, no, where are you really from? I said, no, I really am from Duluth. And it's not a question that everyone gets asked. People are just curious and well-intentioned. But what is implied in that question is there's a we implied, and I am not part of that we when that question is asked. And so I think the perception of who we are as Minnesotans and what we really are is there's a gap. It's a big gap. And so what I'm really trying to do is understand who we are and reflect that in my photographs.
What have you learned about race since you've been focusing on cultural diversity in your work?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it's probably the most dynamic friction in our culture, which is a debate, a fight. Who gets to decide who we are as Americans? So I hear this from all different generations and all different ethnicities. They would say, American people. I said, what do you mean American people? I'm American. And what people are really referring to is white people. So what I'm trying to do is just show the everyday realities of who we are.
If there was one thing that you want the folks who come to visit this exhibit, what one takeaway would you want them to have?
It's one thing to go to an exhibit and feel that you're enlightened. You have to carry those thoughts with you on a daily basis. What are the ripple effects of this exhibition? How will this affect your daily life? I think it's difficult to look at each other as individuals. We size each other up based on what we think of the other person, and we are formed by what we think by images. And so how do we just look at each other without thinking about all those images that formed our ideas of the world and ourselves?
Wing's powerful and poignant images bring a certain humanness and intimacy to the exhibit. Be sure to spend some time letting his photos speak to you when you visit. Race, Are We So Different is here at COSI through May 6th. Stay tuned for more details after the break, and we will share some viewer feedback when we come back. Welcome back to the Realities of Race. Tonight, we hope that we have presented a foundation for conversation about race, and we hope that you will visit COSI and experience this exhibit for yourself, your friends, and your family. COSI is open Wednesdays through Saturdays 10 to 5 and Sundays from noon to 6. And of course, there are plenty of other fun things to learn and explore while you're here. Lots of fun for the young and the young at heart. We've talked a lot about the conversations we would like to see develop from this exhibit and from tonight's program. When you visit the exhibit, you're invited to jot down your thoughts on cards and then to drop those cards in boxes around the exhibit. We have chosen some of those comments to share with you tonight. This one is from a young immigrant, 21 years old, from India. I came here at the young age of 7. I learned quickly that most people, usually kids, either were accepting of me or stayed away, seeing me as different. I still think that people sometimes see me by my race. It's the first judgment rather than who I am from getting to know me. This one from Anna. When I went to Guatemala, everybody looked like me. And then there's this one. Skin color does not matter, no matter who you are or where you're from. Just remember, everyone has a heart and feelings. We all live and die. Nobody is different just because of the color. The whole concept of race was created, manufactured to point out and exploit differences, to establish separate and segregated communities. The whole idea of this exhibit is to understand that the differences aren't that great. The similarities are. And the best way to celebrate and embrace the similarities and the differences and unite our community is to first understand the realities of race. For all of us here at COSI and at 10 TV, thanks for watching. Good night.